Welcome back. We're in Khan Academy on Algebra 1 and the unit is Quadratic Functions and Equations. We are on Completing the Square intro. This is the first in a series on the topic of completing the square, and this method of finishing out a quadratic function or solving for its zeros or manipulating it so that you can do that, this completing the square is the method that we'll use eventually to actually prove the quadratic formula, which shortcuts all the steps that we're about to learn and lets us cut directly to a formula that solves an equation for its zeros. So if we have a quadratic function, ax squared plus bx plus c, and we want to know where that function has y values of 0, then we can use the quadratic formula where we take those constant terms, a, b, and c, and plug them into this formula, and it gives us possibly two solutions if the discriminant here, b squared minus 4ac, if that is a positive number, we would be getting two solutions. If it's equal to 0, then we're adding or subtracting nothing and we get one solution. Or if the discriminant is negative, the square root of a negative number is an imaginary number, which means we don't have any real solutions, which means that the function never crosses the x-axis. Okay? Now, in order to come up with this formula, we have to be able to complete the square. So, let's look at this. What is the missing constant term in the perfect square that starts with x squared minus 20x? So, perfect square trinomials is what they're talking about. This is the start of a perfect square trinomial. The first term is squared, x squared. The middle term is 20x. And we still need a third term to make this trinomial. In order to have a perfect square, we need a square number here so that when we factor the whole expression into two binomials, they are identical. In other words, we're going to be able to put this factor times itself. So this factor squared. So this function, f of x, is going to be factorable so that in the end we can express it as one factor squared. Okay, so fair enough. We need something times something to give us x squared. Well, that's x. X times x is x squared. We need one number here to give us a negative 20 times x somehow. So we have to have some number of x's and the same number of x's give us negative 20. Well, half of negative 20 is negative 10. Like that. So x times x is x squared. Negative 10x minus 10 more x's is negative 20x. And then to expand this further, we have negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. That's the answer to their question, but let's just finish this out. X minus 10. So this whole expression right here, this whole expression is a perfect square trinomial because it can be factored into two identical factors that can be expressed as that factor squared. So if we wanted to make a picture, it would be a square. This is why it's called a perfect square trinomial. It's because this expression is the area of this square. So the side lengths are x minus 10 by x minus 10. That's why it's called a perfect square trinomial. They asked us for what the missing constant is. That was the missing constant right there. So we'll put it here, 100. Let's look at this next problem. What is the missing constant term in the perfect square that starts with x squared plus 6x? Well, x plus 6x plus some constant we don't know, has to be factorable, so we'll call this f of x. So f of x has to equal some factor that we can square. Okay, so something times itself gives us x squared, that's x. And then, to get a 6x term in the middle, I'm going to have a number of x's and the same number of x's equal x 6x. Well, that'd be, each one of them would have to be half of the 6x, so that's 3. 3x's plus 3 more x's is 6x. Now when I square this, I get 3 times 3 is 9. So my missing constant term was positive 9. Now, before we go on, notice that in the previous one, I had to divide the constant on my x term by 2 to get the number in my factored form, which I then turned around and squared. The same thing happened in this problem. I divided 6 by 2, and then I squared that number to get my constant. That's what's going to happen every single time, which is great because it makes a formula for us to use. So in this one, our constant's going to be half of 14, and then we'll square that. So we know that it's 7, so 14 divided by 2, and then we're going to square that. And so 7 squared is 49. The constant on a perfect square trinomial is always going to be positive because even if the middle term is negative, we're going to end up taking a negative number times a negative number. And so when we square a negative number, we get a positive number. This will always be positive. Now let's look at what it looks like here. X squared plus 14x plus 49. That's equal to x plus 7 times x plus 7. X times x is x squared. 7x's plus 7x's is 14x. That's why we were doing the dividing by 2, because we had to have a constant here in our factored form that was half as much as it ends up being in the expanded form. And then we turn around and take that number and multiply it by itself. That gives us our constant in the perfect square trinomial. Next question. So, half of positive 2 squared is 1. That means that x squared plus 2x plus 1 is a perfect square trinomial. We can confirm that. That should equal x plus 1 squared. X times x is x squared. 1 times x is x, plus another 1 times x is 2x, and 1 times 1 is 1. And we're done.